My fiancé's secret baby wasn't actually mine. Her mother revealed the truth at the altar. The soft glow of my apartment lights reflected off the ultrasound photo I'd been staring at for the past hour. Monday, June 12th, 3 days until my wedding. The photo showed our little one at 22 weeks, a grainy silhouette that I'd convinced myself looked exactly like Rachel, my fiancée. Her button nose, I'd told everyone, that's definitely her nose. Looking back now, I realize I was seeing what I wanted to see, not what was actually there. Everything had been progressing exactly as planned. Rachel and I met 5 years ago at a corporate networking event, of all places. She worked in marketing at a tech firm downtown, and I was an accountant at a mid-sized financial services company. Not the most romantic origin story, but it was ours. We dated for 3 years before I proposed with a diamond ring I'd spent months agonizing over. She'd said yes at a restaurant overlooking the city skyline, and suddenly my life felt like it had finally reached the point where everything makes sense. The career was stable, the relationship was solid, we had a nice condo in a decent neighborhood. Then came the pregnancy announcement 6 months ago, and I genuinely believed I'd reached the peak of human contentment. The thing about being content is that you stop asking questions. You accept things at face value. You don't wonder why your fiancé seems anxious about certain topics. You don't notice when she's vague about her past relationships or when she gets cagey about her phone. You're just too busy planning seating arrangements and arguing with your mother about whether the rehearsal dinner should be casual or slightly formal. I should have been suspicious. Hell, I should have seen about 1,000 red flags if I'd been paying attention. But when you're riding on a wave of what you think is genuine happiness, you become blind to reality. Rachel had seemed thrilled about the pregnancy. She'd done all the expected things, the maternity photo shoot, the nursery setup, the countless doctor's appointments that I attended faithfully, taking notes like I was studying for an exam. Her mother, Patricia, had been around constantly, helping with baby preparations and wedding details. I'd always found Patricia to be a bit much, but I figured all mothers-in-law-to-be were like that, overbearing but well-intentioned. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening at an Italian restaurant downtown. It was supposed to be a casual, intimate affair with just close family and friends. My parents had flown in from Ohio, Rachel's father passed away 12 years ago, so it would be just Patricia, my folks, and a handful of our closest friends. I remember feeling strangely calm about it all. The panic that I thought would come before such a major life event never materialized. Instead, there was just this quiet acceptance of what felt inevitable, like I was a passenger watching my life unfold rather than actually living it. Wednesday morning, I woke up feeling oddly anxious. Not nervous about the wedding exactly, but something felt off. Rachel had been distant the night before, claiming she was tired and heading to bed early. When I tried to hold her, she said the pregnancy had been making her uncomfortable in that position. Fair enough. I'd read enough pregnancy websites to know that the final trimester could be rough on your body. I rolled over and went to sleep, trying not to overthink the slight distance that had grown between us over the past few weeks. The anxiety didn't fade throughout Wednesday. I went to work, tried to focus on my final projects before taking 2 weeks off for the honeymoon and paternity leave, but my mind kept drifting. I found myself scrolling through our wedding hashtag, looking at the photos people were posting. Rachel looked beautiful in every shot, genuinely happy and radiant in that way pregnant women often do. I looked like a man who had everything figured out, which made me want to laugh bitterly now. By Wednesday evening, I'd convinced myself that the anxiety was just pre-wedding jitters. Totally normal. Every groom experiences it. I showered, put on the outfit I'd chosen for the rehearsal dinner, and went to pick up Rachel from her apartment. She'd been staying with her mother that week to help with last-minute wedding preparations. Walking up to Patricia's house, I noticed Rachel's car in the driveway. Patricia's car was there too. I rang the doorbell and waited, holding the small bouquet of flowers I'd bought, ready to present them to Rachel as a sentimental gesture. Patricia answered the door first, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. "There he is," she'd said, pulling me in for a hug that lasted a beat too long. Looking back at that moment now, I can see she was holding something. Not literally, figuratively. She was carrying the weight of a secret that would blow up my entire world within the next 24 hours. She was looking at me with an expression that I now recognize as pity mixed with guilt. the face of someone who knows something they shouldn't know and is wrestling with whether to say it. That evening at the rehearsal dinner would be the last night of my old life, the last night of believing the version of the future I'd constructed in my mind. By tomorrow, everything I thought I knew about Rachel, about our relationship, about the baby on the way, would transform into something unrecognizable. The truth was coming, and honestly, I had absolutely no idea what was about to hit me. The rehearsal dinner started exactly as expected. My mother insisted on fussing over the table arrangements, my father smiled politely through conversations about decorations, and Rachel's mother seemed to be moving between tables with unusual energy. She was dressed nicer than I'd ever seen her, in a deep burgundy dress with her hair professionally done. I remember thinking she was making a real effort, which I appreciated. Patricia had always treated me kindly enough, though she'd always maintained this slightly theatrical quality, like she was performing the role of mother-in-law rather than actually being one. Rachel looked absolutely stunning that evening. She wore a flowing navy dress that accommodated her growing belly perfectly, and her makeup was flawless. When I kissed her hello, she felt tense, like her muscles were all clenched underneath her skin. I asked if she was feeling all right, if the baby was kicking too much, or if she was experiencing any of the discomfort she'd mentioned earlier in the week. She'd smiled and said she was fine, just tired, just excited for the wedding, just pregnant. The same answers she'd been giving for weeks. We went through the traditional rehearsal dinner flow. My best man gave a toast that made everyone laugh. My mother gave a toast that made everyone cry slightly. Rachel's friend from college gave a toast about how she'd never seen Rachel so happy. Each time someone mentioned how perfect we were together, how right we seemed as a couple, I felt myself sinking deeper into a sense of cosmic irony that I didn't yet understand. Dinner was served around 7 o'clock. The restaurant had done a beautiful job with the private room they'd reserved for us. String lights were draped across the ceiling, there were flowers on the tables, everything screamed special occasion in that polite, expensive way. I sat between Rachel and my mother, helping Rachel reach things she couldn't quite grab with her belly in the way, playing the attentive partner to perfection. I was genuinely attentive. I wasn't performing. That's what made this all so particularly cruel, now that I think about it. Somewhere around the dessert course, Patricia excused herself. She said she needed to use the restroom, but she was gone for what felt like a long time. When she returned, I noticed she was moving differently. More deliberately, more carefully, like each step required significant concentration. She went to the bar in the corner of the private room and ordered a drink, then another, and then another. By the time dessert was being cleared away and people were starting to move around more casually, Patricia was visibly intoxicated. Not falling down drunk, but that specific kind of drunk where all your filters disappear and your emotional temperature rises significantly. She kept laughing at things that weren't particularly funny. She started sitting down next to me, then getting up and moving to talk to other people, then coming back. "You're such a good man," she'd said to me at one point, her hand gripping my arm perhaps a little too firmly. "Really such a good man." I'd thanked her awkwardly, not sure how to respond to this sudden emotional intensity. Rachel had shot her mother a warning look that I registered but didn't fully process. Patricia just waved it away and went back to the bar. The evening was winding down around 11 o'clock. Most of the older guests had already left. It was just the younger crowd and close family remaining, talking quietly, checking their phones, mentally preparing for the big day tomorrow. My parents decided to head back to their hotel. Rachel was noticeably tired, leaning against me on the small sofa where we were sitting together. That's when Patricia approached us. She was moving with that exaggerated care that drunk people use when they're trying to seem more sober than they are. She sat down on the coffee table directly in front of us, which was odd because that's not where people normally sit. She was looking at me intensely, and I noticed Rachel suddenly went rigid beside me. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said. Her words were slightly slurred but still intelligible. "I can't carry this anymore. It's too much. You're such a good man, and you deserve to know before you marry her tomorrow." Rachel had actually gasped, an audible, shocked gasp that made everyone in the nearby vicinity turn and look at us. She'd reached out and grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom, no, don't do this," Rachel had said. Her voice suddenly panicked in a way I'd never heard before. But Patricia had shaken her off with the determination of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be stopped. She looked directly into my eyes, and in that moment, I saw that mixture of pity and guilt that I'd noticed when she opened the door earlier. I saw guilt so profound that my stomach actually started to hurt. "The baby," Patricia had said, her voice steady despite the alcohol in her system. "The baby isn't yours. My daughter," she gestured at Rachel, who was now white as a sheet, "she's been in contact with her ex, the one from before you. His name is Devin. She got pregnant with his child, and she was planning to never tell you. She was going to let you believe it was yours your whole life." The world had stopped moving. Everything around me, the soft restaurant ambiance, the quiet conversations of other guests, even my own breathing, had become muffled, like I was underwater. I was aware of Rachel standing up, aware of her saying something, aware of her mother still talking, but none of it was reaching my brain in a way that made coherent sense. "I'm sorry," Patricia had continued, and she actually was crying now. "I'm so sorry, but I couldn't let you do this. Not to him, not to anyone." What happened next was a blur. Rachel had pulled her mother away, apologizing frantically, denying some of it, confirming other parts of it without meaning to. My best friend had appeared at my shoulder, hand on my back, asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. I wouldn't be okay for a very, very long time. By midnight, the rehearsal dinner had dissolved into chaos. My parents were still in the building, having been called back down by my panicked best man. Rachel's childhood friend was trying to comfort Rachel, who was crying hysterically about something that definitely wasn't love or compassion. It was purely self-preservation. Patricia was being ushered away by another family member, still looking devastated but resolved, like she'd just released something heavy she'd been carrying. And I was sitting on that same sofa, staring at nothing, trying to comprehend that everything I thought I knew about my life had just been completely obliterated by a drunk confession at a rehearsal dinner. I had exactly 24 hours to decide whether I was actually going to marry this woman tomorrow or whether I was going to walk away from the biggest day of my life. The wedding venue already paid for, invitations already sent, approximately 200 people expecting to see me get married to someone who'd been deceiving me the entire time. That night would mark the beginning of the end of one life and the brutal, confusing, heartbreaking start of another. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. I lay in my hotel room. My parents had insisted I move to their hotel instead of going back to my apartment, and stared at the ceiling while my phone buzzed constantly with messages. Text messages from Rachel, from Patricia, from confused friends who'd gotten wind of the drama, from my best man asking if I wanted him to come over, from my mother who kept checking on me every hour with concerned text messages. I didn't respond to any of them. I just let my phone buzz and buzz until eventually, around 3 in the morning, it finally stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the notifications. By 6:47 a.m., I had formulated approximately 17 different versions of how this day could potentially unfold, and each one was more disastrous than the last. The most optimistic version involved me canceling the wedding and merely experiencing mild to moderate social humiliation. The most pessimistic involved me showing up anyway and making some kind of dramatic scene at the altar, which would probably haunt me for decades. I called in my parents to have a conversation. They arrived in my hotel room looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight. My mother had been crying. My father looked grim in that way fathers do when they're trying not to have a complete emotional breakdown in front of their son. We sat on the various hotel furniture and talked through what had been revealed at the rehearsal dinner. My father wanted to know if the baby was definitely not mine. I explained that I hadn't asked for confirmation, but Patricia had seemed very certain, and Rachel's reaction had pretty much confirmed it. My mother wanted to know if I loved Rachel despite this revelation. I genuinely didn't know the answer to that question. How do you separate love from deception? How do you stay committed to someone when you realize they've been planning to lie to you not just once, but for the rest of your life? "What does Rachel have to say?" my father asked. "Have you actually talked to her?" The answer was no. I'd been avoiding her because I didn't trust myself to remain composed if I heard her voice or saw her face. I was terrified that if I actually had to look at her and listen to her try to explain herself, I would either break down completely or say something absolutely unforgivable that would make it impossible to have any kind of future, whether that future included marriage or just co-parenting or anything in between. My mother wanted me to get clarity before making any decisions. She was right, of course. As much as I wanted to just cancel everything and disappear into the desert somewhere to live out my days in peace, I owed it to myself to at least hear Rachel's side of the story. Even if it was all lies, even if it only made things worse. I called Rachel at 8:15 a.m. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the terror and desperation in her voice immediately. "Please don't cancel," she'd said before I'd even fully said hello. "Please, just give me a chance to explain. Please." I'd agreed to meet her. We decided on a coffee shop about 15 minutes away from the wedding venue, a neutral location where we could talk without being overheard, but also with the safety of being in a public space. I was genuinely afraid of what might happen if we were completely alone. Not physically, I'm not that kind of person, but emotionally. I was terrified I might just completely fall apart. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. It was a Saturday morning, and most people were probably still sleeping or had better things to do than drink coffee in a casual cafe on what should have been their wedding day. Rachel was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She looked absolutely destroyed. Her face was blotchy from crying. Her hair, which she'd had professionally done the day before, was now pulled back into a messy bun. She was wearing sweatpants and one of those pregnancy cardigans, looking like she hadn't slept either. We sat across from each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds. She started talking before I could even think about what I wanted to say. Rachel explained that she and Devin had dated for 2 years before they broke up. It had been messy and painful, and she'd spent about a year really struggling with the aftermath of that relationship. Then she'd met me, and things had started to get better. She'd genuinely loved me. She hadn't been with Devin at all during our relationship, not physically anyway. But about 8 months ago, he'd reached out to her. They'd started texting, they'd gotten coffee a few times, and one of those times, things had escalated. It had happened only once. It was a mistake. They'd agreed it was a mistake and ended all contact immediately. Then, 6 weeks later, she'd found out she was pregnant, and she'd panicked. She'd done 3 pregnancy tests before she could even believe it was real. She hadn't told Devin. She'd been terrified of what would happen if she did. Would he want her to have an abortion? Would he want to be involved? She couldn't face any of those scenarios while simultaneously planning her life with me, planning our future, planning our wedding. So she'd decided to keep it a secret. She'd convinced herself that she could just let me believe the baby was mine, that we'd get married, have the baby, and she'd just pretend it was ours together, this perfect blended family moment. She genuinely thought she could live with that lie. She genuinely thought I would never know. I asked her the obvious question. Why would you ever think that wouldn't come out? Why would you think you could just have a baby with someone else's DNA and never have me find out? She broke down completely. She sobbed at that table in the empty coffee shop, and I watched her fall apart, and I felt absolutely nothing. No compassion, no anger, just a strange hollow numbness that seemed to be replacing all my other emotions. She admitted that she hadn't thought about it. She'd just pushed the problem away, the way she'd pushed away so many things in her life. She'd hoped that by the time it mattered, by the time the baby was born or got older or asked questions, she'd figure something out. Or maybe she'd never have to. Maybe I'd just accept it. Maybe the lie would just become so embedded in our reality that it wouldn't matter anymore. I asked her if Devin knew about me. She said no, not really. He knew she was engaged and pregnant, but she told him they weren't together anymore and that she was with someone else. She said he'd tried to reach out about the baby, about potentially being involved, but she'd blocked his number. That's when I realized that there were actually 3 victims in this situation: me, Devin, and the baby. None of us had been given the information we needed to make informed decisions about our own lives. I was about to marry someone based on false premises. Devin didn't know he had a child on the way. And the baby, this innocent child, was about to be born into a web of lies that would eventually have to be untangled, probably messily, probably painfully. I looked at Rachel across that coffee shop table and I barely recognized her. She was still the person I loved, but she was also suddenly a complete stranger. Someone capable of deception on a scale I'd never imagined. Someone willing to build a future for all of us based on fundamental falsehoods. "I can't marry you today," I'd said finally. "I don't even know if I can ever marry you. I need time. I need to figure out what I want. I need to figure out who you actually are versus who I thought you were." Rachel had nodded, accepting this without argument. She'd apologized again and again, but the apologies felt hollow now. We didn't hug, we didn't make any promises about the future. I left her there with her cold coffee and her devastation, and I drove back to the hotel to tell my parents and my best man what I'd decided. The wedding would not be happening today. Canceling a wedding 5 hours before it's supposed to happen is an absolute nightmare that I would not wish on my worst enemy. The phone calls alone were brutal. My wedding planner had a complete emotional meltdown when I told her. My best man had to explain to 200 people why they'd driven an hour and a half to a venue only to find out the wedding wasn't happening. My mother had to call every family member and friend who was already en route or had already arrived at the hotel. The venue manager wanted to know if I was canceling or just postponing. I didn't have a good answer for that. Postponing implied there was a possibility of this wedding happening eventually. Canceling implied it was over for good. The truth was somewhere in between, suspended in a state of absolute uncertainty that matched the current state of my entire existence. By noon, the venue had been partially cleared. Some people were demanding refunds. Others were asking for explanations that I wasn't prepared to give. My mother had taken it upon herself to tell the family members who would listen that there were complications and that the wedding would be rescheduled. It was a kind lie, and I was grateful for it, even as I was horrified by the fact that I was now surrounded by so much deception that kindness and lying had become almost indistinguishable. I spent most of Saturday afternoon in my hotel room by myself, which was not great for my mental health. The silence was deafening. Without the wedding to think about, without the immediate crisis to manage, my mind kept spinning in circles. I tried to process what I'd learned. I tried to imagine the different directions my life could go from this point forward. I tried not to catastrophize too much about the future, which was nearly impossible given the circumstances. By Sunday morning, I was approaching a complete nervous breakdown. My mother had finally gotten me to agree to see a therapist, specifically a therapist on call for crisis situations who could see me that same day. I'm genuinely grateful for that decision. Even though sitting in a stranger's office and recounting my entire relationship implosion was one of the most painful experiences of my life. The therapist helped me understand that I was experiencing severe trauma. She explained that discovering your fiancé's massive deception right before your wedding is classified as major psychological shock, and that my numbness and confusion were actually normal responses to abnormal situations. She gave me some coping strategies and recommended that I not make any major decisions about the relationship for at least a few weeks. My brain needed time to process everything before I could make rational choices about my future. That week was the most miserable week of my entire life, and I've been through some genuinely difficult things. But there was something uniquely soul-crushing about having to go back to work on Monday and pretend like everything was fine. I'd sent out a brief email to my colleagues saying I was taking the 2 weeks off that I'd originally planned for the honeymoon, just for personal reasons. I didn't mention the wedding cancellation. As far as I knew, they might not have even realized I was supposed to get married. My best friend came over Monday night and basically sat with me while I drank beer and stared at the television without actually processing anything that was happening on screen. He didn't try to fix things or convince me that everything would be okay. He just existed in the space next to me, which was somehow exactly what I needed. "What are you going to do about the baby?" he asked at one point, carefully, like he was navigating a minefield. That was the question I'd been avoiding thinking about, because the legal, financial, and emotional complications of that situation were staggering. Even if I didn't marry Rachel, there was still the fact that I'd been planning to raise this child. I'd bought baby furniture, I'd read parenting books, I'd imagined introducing my kid to my friends and my family. How did I just walk away from all of that? But equally, how could I be involved in raising a child that wasn't biologically mine when that entire relationship was built on deception? I don't know, I answered honestly. I genuinely have no fucking idea. Over the next few days, I started getting more information about the situation through various sources. Patricia, feeling guilty and wanting to help, had asked Devin for his contact information. I didn't ask how she got it. I was trying not to ask too many questions about how she'd known about the affair in the first place, or why she'd decided to drop this bomb at the rehearsal dinner. The important thing was that I now had Devin's number, and I had to make a decision about whether I was going to call him. This felt like a crucial moment. The right thing to do would be to call him and explain that he had a child on the way and that he deserved to know. The self-preserving thing to do would be to pretend I didn't have his number and just let Rachel figure out how to tell him, which was actually her responsibility. After 3 days of agonizing, I called him. I explained who I was and what I know. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and then Devin had said, "She's pregnant?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She's due in about 3 months, and it's yours." Another silence. Then he'd said, "Fuck." We talked for about 20 minutes. He explained his perspective, that he'd reached out because he'd never really gotten over Rachel, that he'd been stupid and impulsive about the situation, that he had absolutely no idea about the pregnancy. He seemed like a reasonably decent person, which somehow made everything worse. He wasn't a villain, he wasn't someone I could hate, he was just someone who'd made a mistake, and now he was going to have a child because of it. Devin wanted to be involved. He asked about visitation rights and custody. He asked if Rachel had told me she wanted him in the picture. I explained that I wasn't actually married to Rachel anymore, that the wedding had been canceled because of this situation. He seemed genuinely shocked. "Wait, you canceled the wedding?" he'd asked. "Because of me? Because of the baby?" I explained that the wedding was canceled because Rachel had been planning to deceive me my entire life about the paternity of the child. Devin seemed to understand that, though I'm not sure he truly grasped the full extent of the betrayal, since he hadn't been the one she was deceiving. By the end of the phone call, we'd exchanged information and agreed that we probably needed to have a more formal conversation once we both had time to process what was happening. He seemed like a person who was going to want to be in his child's life, which was actually good news for the baby, even if it made my own situation more complicated. The week after the canceled wedding, Rachel finally reached out with a proposal. She wanted to meet with me and talk about what came next. She said she'd hired a lawyer to start the process of contacting Devin formally and establishing him as the biological father. She said she understood if I didn't want to be involved anymore. She said she'd moved into her mother's house and was trying to figure out her life. She said she was deeply sorry for everything and that she understood if I could never forgive her. I agreed to meet with her again. I needed to know what the path forward looked like, even if I still had no idea whether I wanted to walk that path with her or not. And more than that, I needed to understand who Rachel actually was beneath all the lies and deception. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, I agreed to meet Rachel at a neutral location. Not the coffee shop this time, but a park about halfway between my apartment and her mother's house. It was a beautiful late June day, warm but not too hot, with a slight breeze that made the trees move in that gentle, calming way that nature has when it's being kind to your nervous system. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the entrance to the park. She'd gotten bigger since I'd last seen her in person. The pregnancy was really showing now, and she had that full belly waddling gait that pregnant women often develop. She looked up when I approached, and her face showed a mixture of hopefulness and dread that made me feel slightly less numb about the whole situation. We sat on the bench, and there was an awkward silence before she started talking. She explained that she'd been seeing a therapist, the same therapist I'd been seeing actually, which felt weird but also made sense. They'd talked about why Rachel had made the choices she did. Not excuses, but actual psychological reasons rooted in her history and her patterns. Rachel had grown up with her father, who was emotionally unavailable and frequently dishonest about important things. Her mother had spent most of Rachel's childhood trying to hold the family together by pretending nothing was wrong. So Rachel had learned early that sometimes keeping a secret was a form of love, that if you pretended everything was fine, you could maintain the illusion of stability. Her therapist believed this was why she'd made the decision to hide her affair and the pregnancy. In her twisted logic, she was protecting me from pain the way her mother had tried to protect her. "That doesn't make it okay," Rachel said immediately before I could say anything. "I'm not trying to excuse what I did, I'm just trying to explain it. I was being selfish and cowardly and deceptive, and those things are still true. But I was also coming from a place of real psychological patterns that I've had my entire life." I appreciated the honesty, even though it didn't exactly make me feel better about the situation. Rachel went on to explain what she'd been doing since the wedding. She'd hired a lawyer, she'd contacted Devin formally and explained the situation. He'd been angry at first, but had eventually seemed to accept it. He was going to be on the birth certificate, and they were working out a custody arrangement. He wanted to be involved in the pregnancy and wanted to be present at the birth. "I deserve that," Rachel said, "and he deserves that, and the baby deserves to know both of their parents. I've accepted that now. I just didn't accept it before." I asked her the question that had been keeping me up at night for 2 weeks. "Why are you telling me all of this? What do you want from me?" Rachel looked out at the park for a long moment. There was a family about 50 yards away, with 2 kids playing on the grass while their parents watched. I wondered if that was what Rachel had imagined for us, the happy family unit that would never actually exist now. "I want to know if there's any possibility of us finding our way back to some kind of relationship," Rachel said. "Not romantic, necessarily. Maybe that's not possible. But I'm going to be a mother in 3 months, and I'm genuinely terrified. I've realized over the past 2 weeks that I'm not actually a strong person the way I thought I was. I'm someone who avoids conflict and makes bad decisions and then tries to cover up those bad decisions. I need help. I need support. And I'm asking if you would be willing to consider being some kind of co-parent figure, or at least a friend, or just someone who knows the truth and loves this child anyway." That was the moment when I felt something start to break open inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a tiny crack in the armor of my anger that let in the tiniest bit of compassion. Because the truth was, I had loved Rachel. I might still love her, if I was being honest. And I definitely loved the idea of the baby, even if the baby didn't actually carry my genes. "I can't give you an answer to that right now," I'd said. "I'm still so angry. I'm still so betrayed. I don't know how to trust you anymore." "I know," Rachel said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for the possibility of a future where you're not completely out of the picture." We talked for another hour. We discussed the practical logistics of the baby's arrival. Rachel explained that she was planning to stay at her mother's house for the first few months after the birth, which gave her support while she adjusted to motherhood. Devin was planning to take a 2-week paternity leave and would be involved from day one. Rachel was planning to go back to work after 3 months, and they were trying to figure out a custody arrangement that would make sense for everyone. I asked if I could think about it. She said yes, of course. We exchanged numbers. I deleted hers from my phone in a moment of bitter finality, which now felt petty but also necessary at the time. We agreed that we would touch base after the baby was born, and I could decide at that point whether I wanted to be involved in any capacity. As I was leaving the park, Rachel called out to me. "What was the baby's name going to be, in your version of the future?" I'd actually forgotten about that. Rachel and I had spent hours discussing baby names while she was pregnant. We'd narrowed it down to a few options, though we hadn't officially decided. "If it's a boy, we were thinking about Thomas," I said, "after my grandfather. If it's a girl, we were thinking about Olivia." Rachel looked sad when I said that, like she was grieving a version of the future that would never exist. I felt sad too. That future had been so close I could almost touch it, and then it had just vanished, like it was never real at all. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life, in whatever shape it was going to take. I went back to work full-time. I started seeing my therapist once a week. I spent time with my friends and family, trying to reconnect with the parts of my life that hadn't been completely consumed by Rachel and the wedding and the baby. But I was also checking my phone constantly, waiting for updates. And I realized I didn't want to miss the birth of the baby, even though it wasn't biologically mine, even though I had no legal claim to it, even though the circumstances were complicated and painful and would probably never be fully resolved. I wanted to be there. I wanted to see this child come into the world. On July 15th, I got a text message from Rachel. "I'm in labor. It's happening now." And I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I drove to the hospital.
The maternity ward of St. Catherine's Hospital was chaos in the way that all medical situations are chaos. There were nurses moving rapidly from room to room, monitors beeping, people being wheeled on gurneys. I found Patricia in the waiting room, and she directed me to Rachel's room. She didn't ask why I was there or whether I should be there. She just seemed grateful that I had come. Rachel was in active labor when I arrived. The doctor said she still had a few hours to go. Patricia was there, of course, and when she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. She knew what it meant that I'd come to the hospital. She knew that I was still deciding whether to be part of this child's life, and the fact that
I'd driven to the hospital meant something to her. Devin was also there, sitting in the corner of the waiting room looking absolutely terrified. This was his first child. He was about 35 years old, worked in construction, and looked completely out of place in a hospital gown area. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly, not sure whether to approach me or maintain distance. We hadn't seen each other since our phone conversation 6 weeks ago. I walked over to him and shook his hand. There was a weird mutual respect there. Two men who'd been thrown into this bizarre situation together, neither of us entirely at fault, but both of us affected by Rachel's choices. "Thanks for coming," Devin said. "I know this is weird." "It's definitely weird," I agreed, "but I wanted to be here." We stood together in an uncomfortable silence for a while. Patricia kept bringing us water and asking if we needed anything. At one point, she asked Devin if he'd eaten, and he said he was too nervous to eat. I understood that feeling completely. I hadn't eaten either since getting Rachel's text message about labor starting. Around 8 p.m., we were allowed into Rachel's room. She was in serious pain at that point, clearly in active labor, her face contorted with the effort of her body doing what it was designed to do. When she saw me, she started crying, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded, acknowledging my presence, acknowledging that I'd chosen to be there despite everything. Devin went to her side immediately, holding her hand, telling her she could do this, that he was there for her. And I watched them together, and I realized something that I'd been avoiding confronting. Rachel and Devin had created something together, a child. And regardless of the deception and the chaos and the pain, that child was about to enter the world, and that child deserved to have both of their parents present and supportive. I positioned myself at the other end of the room, giving Devin the space to be the father figure while I just existed as a support system. Rachel's labor progressed over the next 4 hours. The doctor came in periodically to check on her progress, the nurses rotated in and out, Patricia sat quietly in a chair, occasionally wiping Rachel's forehead with a cool washcloth. At 11:47 p.m., the actual birth happened. I'm not going to describe the graphic details of childbirth because, honestly, it's one of those things that's somehow both beautiful and deeply uncomfortable to witness. But I will say that when that baby came into the world, when the doctor placed that tiny, screaming, perfect little girl into Rachel's arms, something shifted in me. All the anger, all the betrayal, all the pain of the past 6 weeks seemed to momentarily fade into insignificance in the face of this new human being arriving on the planet. "It's a girl," the doctor said, though at that point it was pretty obvious. "Congratulations." Rachel was crying, Devin was crying, Patricia was crying, and if I'm being completely honest, I was crying too. This tiny girl had no idea what her arrival meant for all of us. She had no idea that her birth was the culmination of lies and affairs and deception and heartbreak. She just existed, perfect and innocent, completely unaware of the complicated web of circumstances that had brought her into being. The medical staff quickly took care of the standard procedures, weighing the baby, measuring her, checking her vitals. Everything looked healthy. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 19.5 inches long. Perfect APGAR scores. She was a healthy, beautiful baby girl. Rachel wanted to name her. She looked at Devin and they had a moment of silent communication that I couldn't quite interpret. Then Rachel looked at me. She said, "I want to name her Lily, after your grandmother. I know I don't have the right to use family names anymore, but I want her to have something from you too, something that honors what you meant to me, what you were willing to do for her even when you had every right to walk away." I stood there in that hospital room, looking at this brand new human being, and I realized that Rachel was right. I had walked into this hospital despite having every reason not to. I had shown up, I had been present, and that meant something, at least to this moment, at least to this baby who was being placed back into her mother's arms. "Lily is a beautiful name," I said, and I meant it. The next few hours were a blur of hospital staff instructions, new parent orientation, advice about feeding and diaper changing. Devin stayed by Rachel's side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. Patricia made calls to the rest of the family to let them know that Lily had arrived safely. And I sat in a chair in the corner, watching this new family unit form right before my eyes. Around 3 a.m., when things had finally calmed down and Rachel was attempting to breastfeed while the nurses made sure everything was going correctly, Devin approached me. He pulled me out into the hallway so we could talk privately. "I want you to know something," he said. "I know this isn't your kid biologically. I know you got screwed over in all of this. But the fact that you're here, the fact that you cared enough to show up, that means something. To me, to Rachel, to this baby, eventually, when she's old enough to understand it." I appreciated what he was saying, even though I wasn't entirely sure I agreed with his assessment of my character. I showed up because I was confused and heartbroken and couldn't not show up. That wasn't particularly noble. It was just where my emotions had led me. "I don't know what my role is going to be in all of this," I told him honestly. "I don't know if I can be a father figure. I don't know if I can be friends with Rachel. I don't know anything right now, except that I'm here and I'm trying to figure out what comes next." Devin nodded. He seemed to understand that. He seemed to understand that I wasn't making any promises or commitments. I was just existing in the moment, moment by moment. The next day, Lily's birth certificate was officially filed. Devin was listed as the biological father. Rachel was listed as the mother. I was listed as nothing. That was the legal reality of the situation. I had no claim to this child, no rights, no official connection whatsoever. And in a weird way, that made everything simpler. I could choose to be involved or not involved without any legal or financial complications. Over the next few weeks, I spent time processing what happened. I attended sessions with my therapist and talked through the range of emotions I was experiencing. I visited the hospital a few times after Lily's birth, bringing flowers and baby gifts. I helped Rachel and Patricia navigate some of the more complicated aspects of new motherhood. I wasn't trying to be a father to Lily. I was just trying to be present and helpful while I figured out what my actual role should be. By the time Lily was 6 weeks old, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to be involved in her life. Not as a father, Devin was her father, but as something else, a mentor figure, an uncle, a family friend, someone who would be there for milestones and celebrations and difficult times, someone who could tell her the truth about her origin story when she was old enough to understand it, without judgment or bitterness. Someone who had loved her mother, even though that relationship didn't work out in the traditional way. I couldn't marry Rachel, that much was clear. The foundation of our relationship had been too damaged by her deception. But I could be kind to her. I could coexist with her in this child's life without resentment consuming me. It took time, more therapy, and a lot of internal work, but I got there eventually. As for Rachel and Devin, they decided not to pursue a traditional romantic relationship either, but they became genuinely effective co-parents. They lived near each other, communicated respectfully about Lily's needs, and created a stable environment for her to grow up in. It wasn't the fairy tale nuclear family that either of them had probably imagined at some point, but it worked. It actually functioned better than a lot of traditional marriages I've known. The canceled wedding became something of a family legend. My friends teased me about the most dramatic wedding cancellation in recent memory. My family eventually made peace with the fact that I wasn't marrying Rachel. People moved on. That's what people do. Life continues forward, whether you're ready or not. 1 year after Lily's birth, I found myself in a completely different place than I ever could have imagined. I was at a park on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on a bench with Patricia, watching Lily play in a sandbox while Devin and Rachel sat nearby on another bench, talking about something parenting related. It was one of those moments where everything felt surreal because it was so normalized and functional, despite being absolutely bizarre if you stop to think about it. Lily was walking now, getting more confident every day. She had curly blonde hair that reminded me of Rachel, and these big blue eyes that seemed to take in everything with wonder. She was calling Devin Dada and Rachel Mama, which was exactly right. She was calling me by my name, which was also exactly right.
She didn't need me to be her father. She had a father. She had parents who loved her and were committed to her well-being. What she had in me was stability and kindness and someone who had chosen to be in her life not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to support her growth. My therapist had helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of grief mixed with acceptance. I had grieved the future I'd imagined, the marriage to Rachel, the traditional family unit, the story I'd planned to tell about how we became parents. That grief was real and valid. But I'd also accepted a different future, one that was messier and more complicated, but also more genuine in its own way. I'd started dating again about 8 months after the wedding was canceled. I met someone named Victoria at a coffee shop of all places. We started slowly, and I was honest with her about everything that had happened. She was understanding and patient, and she didn't judge me for the complicated role I'd taken on in Lily's life. I wasn't introducing her to Lily yet. That felt like it should happen only if our relationship became genuinely serious. But I imagined that eventually she might be part of this extended family structure, and that felt okay. Rachel had apologized to me more times than I could count over the past year. I'd accepted those apologies and moved past them. I didn't need her to keep apologizing. I needed her to be a good parent to Lily, to be honest in her future relationships, to do the internal work that would prevent her from making the same mistakes again. And from what I could see, she was doing all of those things. Devin and I had become something like friends, in the weird way that co-parents of a child sometimes do. We'd grab coffee occasionally and talk about Lily's development. He told me about his family, his job, his life. I told him about mine. There was no resentment between us anymore. We'd both been caught in Rachel's web, and we were both doing our best to navigate the reality that had resulted from her choices. Patricia had become my friend too, which was unexpected. She felt genuine remorse for not coming clean about Rachel's affair earlier, before the wedding got so close. We'd talked about that extensively, and I'd forgiven her. She'd done the right thing eventually, even though the timing was terrible. That counted for something. "Thank you for being here," Patricia said to me that afternoon in the park. "Thank you for not completely disappearing. Thank you for choosing to be part of Lily's life even after everything." "I'm here because I want to be," I told her. "I'm past the point of doing things out of obligation or guilt. This is genuinely where I want to be." And I meant that. It was strange to look back at the day before my wedding and realize how much had changed in just 12 months. I'd gone from planning a traditional nuclear family to being part of an unconventional extended family unit. I'd gone from believing I had everything figured out to realizing I knew nothing at all. I'd experienced betrayal and heartbreak and confusion, and somehow I'd come out the other side not bitter, but actually more compassionate. The human heart is strange. It's capable of holding contradictory emotions simultaneously. I could still feel hurt about Rachel's deception and simultaneously feel genuine care for her as a person. I could look at Lily and feel a complex mixture of connection and distance. She wasn't my biological child, but she was absolutely a part of my life. I could forgive Devin while still acknowledging that his actions had contributed to the chaos. Life was messy and complicated and rarely resolved the way you wanted it to be in storybooks. As I watched Lily build sandcastles with Patricia's help, laughing her tiny baby laugh, I thought about all the people who'd asked me over the past year if I regretted showing up at the hospital, if I regretted being involved. The answer was always the same. No, I didn't regret it, even though it would have been easier to walk away. Even though I could have decided that Rachel's deception was unforgivable and that I wanted nothing to do with any of them. Even though a completely reasonable version of me would have just moved on and tried to forget. But I'm not that kind of person. I'm the kind of person who shows up, even when it's complicated. I'm the kind of person who tries to find compassion for people who've hurt me. I'm the kind of person who can look at a situation and see past the immediate drama to the human beings involved who are all just trying to figure out how to move forward. Would I do anything differently if I could go back in time? That's the question I've sat with for the past year, and my answer has evolved. There's a part of me that wishes I'd asked more questions during my relationship with Rachel. A part of me that wishes I'd noticed the red flags that were obviously there. A part of me that wishes she'd just been honest from the beginning. But another part of me, maybe a bigger part, understands that if any of those things had been different, I wouldn't be in this park on this beautiful Saturday afternoon watching this incredible little girl play in the sand. I wouldn't have the relationships I have now with Patricia, Devin, and Rachel. I wouldn't have grown as a person in the ways that I have. I wouldn't have learned that people are complicated and messy and capable of both tremendous cruelty and tremendous grace. My fiancé's secret baby wasn't actually mine, and that revelation destroyed the future I'd imagined for myself. But it also created space for a different future, one that's harder to navigate, but also more real in its complexity. And as I sat there in that park, watching all these people who'd caused me pain and heartbreak and confusion come together to create something that actually worked, I realized that I was genuinely okay. More than okay. I was actually at peace. The story I'd planned to tell about my life, the one where I got married and had a baby and lived happily ever after in some conventional way, didn't happen. But the story I actually got to live is one that I'm learning to appreciate in its own way. It's a story about betrayal and forgiveness. It's a story about choosing compassion over bitterness. It's a story about showing up, even when showing up is the last thing you want to do. It's a story about accepting that life rarely goes according to plan, and sometimes the detours are better than the original destination. As the sun started to set that evening, I helped Patricia gather Lily's toys, and we all walked back toward our cars. Patricia thanked me again. Devin waved goodbye. Rachel held up Lily so she could wave too, and that tiny hand flapped in my direction. I waved back, and I felt something that I hadn't felt 6 months ago. Genuine, uncomplicated happiness about the existence of this strange family I was part of. I didn't need Rachel to be my wife. I didn't need Lily to be my biological daughter. I didn't need Devin to be anything other than what he was. I'd found peace in accepting the reality of the situation rather than fighting against it. I'd found compassion in the space between what I wanted and what I actually got. And that, I realized, was enough. The wedding I was supposed to have didn't happen, but something better did. Something real. Something that couldn't have existed if that carefully planned, beautifully orchestrated future had actually come to pass. Life had a way of surprising you if you could just stay open long enough to let it.